Okay, cool. All right, welcome back, everybody. Full list on the docket today. So market open was about 10 minutes ago. We have Jerome Powell speaking at 10 a.m. Eastern time in about 20 minutes. So we'll be reacting to that live. This is a semi-annual testimony in front of the, I think is the House Financial Services Committee. It's going to be one of those sessions where all these congressmen are going to get their 5 minutes. They're going to spit out these like sound bites. They're going to try to catch him with bullshit questions so that their local newspaper or their local news station is going to clip it up and make them look good. They're going to ask him about things that have nothing to do with his job. The Fed's mandate is maximum employment, price stability. That's it. Price stability, making sure that the dollar is not fluctuating in value. Every day you wake up and this thing is worth something completely different. Inflation is running rampant. And then maximum employment. So creating the conditions necessary in the economy in order to promote hiring and to promote economic growth. They're going to ask about Iran. They're going to ask Jerome Powell about the big beautiful bill, which is a function of Congress, not the Fed. And then he's going to deflect every single question one by one. We're not going to watch all of it. We're going to watch like about an hour of it, and then I'll probably just do like a reaction video on the side. Now, let's get to the docket real quick. There's so much shit going on. I had to put this thing in bullets. Hold on. Okay. So I'm going to cover 4 things here. Trump completely just went bananas. Well, I don't think he went bananas, actually. I think he's completely frustrated with Iran and Israel, their behavior during these negotiations. I think that Trump is believing the deadlines and is believing when both sides say that they want a ceasefire and they're going to sit down for a deal and they put a date on it and they both kind of agree. And then 2 days later, one of their militias on the ground or one of their sort of like generals, like basically there's always 2 factions of all these like different terrorist groups. There's the political side and then there's the military side. Now, the military side has just seen most of their friends get blown to pieces and like their countrymen. They're fighting for a cause that they got sold into, just like, every other side is. And the political side, now they're ready to talk. They're ready to negotiate. But I don't think that Israel or Iran is able to rein in some of those militant groups that are, really just on the front lines. They're the ones with the guns. So I think Trump is very frustrated. We're going to talk about that. He completely let it loose. You guys know I'm not a stranger to cursing. YouTube, not the biggest fan of us for that reason. Trump hit a big one. I got to put it as a thumbnail. It was the quote. It's a direct quote from the President of the United States, YouTube. I can't get demonetized for it. Okay. Yesterday, I came to the defense of Congressman Thomas Massie, one of the last great politicians left in the United States. I aggressively came to his defense to the point where people are in the chats talking about, bro, we don't care. And I had to harp on it. Now, randomly, he gets on Theo Vaughn's podcast last night. They dropped it just like they do a bill in Congress in the dark of the night, 11 p.m. They dropped it. And I'm going to give you guys proof that Thomas Massie is goated. And then I'm going to hit a couple of receipts and show you guys why. He's going to break down the budget. He's going to break down the bill. Theo Vaughn may be the greatest journalist of our time. We might be watching the next Mike Wallace here. What's her name? Deborah. She did all the big interviews, all right? Barbara Walters. We're watching Theo Vaughn morph into something great, all right? So here's the Trump clip. We're going to go into this in detail later. Let's start this back on. Hold on. Excuse the helicopter noise. Let's see if we can get a clean audio.
Better happening at a high level. As you know, Saudi Arabia has done a really good job.
Now let's skip to the fun part.
It says B-2 pilots, a gutless group of people. Brian Roberts.
Oh, give me 1 second. We had this clip.
They violated, but Israel violated.
Now, very important. I'm going to preface this because it's going to be hard to hear over the chopper noises. The reporters ask him if Iran violated the negotiations by bombing. He says, yeah, Iran violated the negotiations, and then continues to say that so did Israel. He's either playing us and we're the joke, and everybody's cool and they're just sort of like pretending to be mad at each other. Or what just happened here is that Trump is frustrated with both sides. And I think he's going to sit both down at the table, grab both kids, tell them to make friends. It's going to be tough to hear, but here it is.
Yeah, they violated, but Israel violated it too. Israel, as soon as we made the deal, they came out and they dropped a load of bombs, the likes of which I've never seen before. The biggest load that we've seen. I'm not happy with Israel. You know, when I say, okay, now you have 12 hours, you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on them. So I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either. But I'm really unhappy if Israel.
All right, chart addicts, you might be at your job right now. You might be at your desk. You might be on the way to do a delivery. You might have just dropped your kids off at school, right? Give me a 1 if you guys think he's being serious. Give me a 2 if you guys think he's bullshitting us. Just give me your first instinct. 1, if you think he's being serious, he's actually upset. 2, if this is all a big sham. What's the gut feeling that you get? Give me your first gut feeling. I don't want you guys to overthink this. First gut feeling. 1, he's telling the truth. 2, we're getting played.
Israel's going out this morning because of one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land.
Chat says 50-50. Marcus Jacob Malik. Sam, why you say 1, bro? You think he's actually mad, or you think we're getting played?
I'm not happy about that. You know
what? I'm gonna let you unmute in a second. You don't have to type all that out. Just let me get to the point where he just completely demolishes Iran and Israel real quick.
Basically have 2 countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the fuck they're doing. Do you understand that?
Chat. Now, this is the same guy that ran The Apprentice, one of the longest running shows in network television. I think he knows how to hook. He knows punchlines, right? Saying they don't know what the fuck they're doing would have been the craziest thing a president could do 6 months ago. But we just bombed the shit out of nuclear facilities. So I think that if they're all in, kind of talking in the background and kind of negotiating, this was kind of like, yo, I'm going to have to drop a bomb. I'm going to have to drop my own kind of bomb. I'm going to have to drop an F-bomb. Yo, that should have been I missed the perfectly good pun. You dropped the F-bomb. First, you dropped the B-2 bombers. Now, all right, anyways. He sounds genuine. Okay, I think he's mad. He put his legacy on the line and attacked Iran. They agree to ceasefire, and 5 minutes into the ceasefire, they both break it. But they've been fighting for 2,000 years. The fuck they gonna stop for 20 minutes? Stop. Let's stop. Come on now. It's like when my kids are fighting. All right. All right. So then what is the solution? Because I'll give you, here's the worst solution, George. As a parent, the only thing you can do to make siblings who just refuse to get along, the only thing you can do is give them a common enemy, right? Which is the parents, which is you, right? Then they start to become friends so that because you suck now, right? Trying to scheme on how to, I don't know, reach the top of the pantry. I don't fucking know. Now we can't do that here. Imagine we turn Iran and Israel into friends and now they don't like us. Because if Trump does something drastic, he could go in there and pull the kids apart. He does have that authority. He just came home from work, tired, trying to get some dinner, watch TV. The kids are fighting. He can do it. But you only get to pull shit like that a couple times. You feel me? So what would you do, George, as a parent? How would you pull these 2 kids apart? It makes Trump look bad now. You know Trump cares how others see him. I don't think it makes Trump look bad at all. I mean, you guys know how I feel about cursing. So I'm not like, I live in reality, right? Bombs are being dropped. People are dying. Curse words can't hurt you. So I'm in that camp where I believe, let it fly. And so this was kind of badass, man. Maybe I curse because I'm just literally whatever comes next into the thought stream, I'm just letting fly. So you really only curse when, when you're kind of just off the cuff, unless this was staged. That's why I had to ask you guys' intuition, because he is a master, like, showman, like the Apprentice show, All right, Jerome Powell hits the stage in about 10 minutes. Let's check the NASDAQ chart. Has not hit the sell zone, has not hit the buy zone yet. We're going to get this trade probably while Jerome Powell is speaking. Let's see. All right. I put them both in timeout. All right. John says, yeah, but Trump still needs to make a move. Bro, we just bombed the shit out of all of their nuclear facilities. Like, this thing was in a mountain. The only plane and the only bombs that could get to it belong to America. And for no reason, on a Monday, on a Tuesday, just pulled the Top Gun move that I showed you guys in the last stream. So that happened. A move, he friggin' bombed Iran. George, thank you. All right, you guys are taking care of this in the chats. I can see this. All right, he needs to talk to Netanyahu and sit his ass down. Dude, I think that Netanyahu's on the same page. I think Qatar, Iran, Israel, I think they're all on the same page. The political wing versus the military wing. Four of your boys just got blown up, man. They're in a wheelchair, got one arm. He's got a wife. His wife looking at him. He's got one arm. You're looking at this shit. You're like, bro, we are not going to cease fire because on a Tuesday they just bombed our facilities, and you want us to cease fire. Like, imagine the troops on the ground trying to wrap their heads around this giant political chess match that's being played. That it makes no fucking sense. George says, I bombed Iran because of you. I'm not going to put you out there like that, George. All right, listen. So that's the Trump. We're going to go back and talk about that. But first, before Jerome Powell hits the stage, this is me vehemently coming to Thomas Massey's defense yesterday on this live stream. Donald Trump is calling out Congressman Thomas Massey, the last great congressman, the last good politician, and good being like a relative thing. There's no good politicians because they all have to do shady shit. But he's about the best. He's the least dirty shirt in the fucking in the pile, in the clothing fucking pile. Okay? Congressman Thomas Massey is an American treasure. I said he's an American treasure. He's not bought and paid for by the sketchiest fucking multinational corporations and does their bidding. He constantly votes to reduce the budget, and he's the only actual fiscal conservative, in the entire Congress. Everybody else is voting on spending $2 trillion. So Donald Trump is sitting here saying, Congress, I'm going to read this word for. So yesterday and today, Trump is on the offensive again, going at Thomas Massey. So I came to his defense. This is yesterday morning, same time, 24 hours ago, same as we sit here today before you. Okay. Then I go and I'm just on YouTube and I see Theo Vaughn post Thomas Massey. Thomas Massey, like 4 years ago, was boring, libertarian, conservative. He's the guy with the debt clock. Okay. Boring guy. Now he's on Theo Vaughn. And Theo Vaughn came to his defense, and Tucker Carlson came to his defense. I'm going to show you guys a few clips here before Jerome Powell hits the stage, because it's going to be a very boring testimony in front of the House Financial Services Committee. They're going to ask him bullshit questions. He's going to deflect. He's going to read off the thing, right? They're going to take up all their time monologuing him as opposed to asking him questions. When he goes to answer, they're going to cut him off. He's going to laugh it off because he's been here before. So let's enjoy a little bit of the I told you so here. That was me yesterday vehemently supporting Thomas Massey. Here's a little bit about Thomas Massey. This is Thomas Massey explaining the national debt.
Until Congress raises the debt limit. Now you say, how did they do that? Well, they start selling off the postal workers pension fund. They take the money that's been saved up to pay your postman his retirement, and they use that to fund other parts of the government. They can only do that for a few months, and that's what we've been doing for the first 6 months of this presidency. And pretty soon we're going to run out of all those extra things we can spend.
That we're leveraging, basically?
Yeah, we're leveraging all that, and they're going to have to pay it all back. So we really probably are closer to 36.6 or 36.8 trillion.
But is that a common practice, like leveraging like pensions or I don't want to say like Medicaid and Medicare? They're not leveraging that, right?
Oh, anything they can get their hands on, they liquidate it. And
what Thomas Massey is describing here is that we're in so much debt that we cannot bring in enough money to pay the interest on this debt. Like he was saying that kind of like, here's a rough number of all the taxes that we pay every year. Look at the total number you paid. The first $16,000 of that goes right out the fucking window, straight to paying the interest on the debt. And so then, because they have to replenish, or they might take some money, like you just said, from Medicare, the budget for old people, the budget for sick people, the budget for the needy. And then they have to use that to finance the government instead, because they used all the tax revenue to pay the interest. And he's going to explain the kind of the credit card example, but spending Medicare money because you mismanaged the debt that's got to be a war crime. These are old people that need that money for the next 10, 15, 20, 25 years to live.
And they spend it, for instance, to buy bombs and send them overseas. All that deficit spending right now is not funded by treasury bonds. All the new deficit spending is funded by, the trust funds that have been established that might have money in them.
Okay. I'm a little confused on that.
Well, it's like this, Theo. Let's say you saved up for your kids' college.
Okay.
They've been going to college, and you got enough to pay the next semester of college. But your credit card comes in, and your credit card gets canceled. So instead of renewing your credit card, you just spend your kids' next tranche of tuition or something. But you got to find that money before the next semester comes back, or else they get kicked out of school.
Okay, and so how do we find them?
My son-in-law makes them and sells them, and he had somebody go on, probably they get anything they can get their hands on. They liquidate it, and they spend it, for instance, to buy bombs and send them overseas. All that deficit spending right now is not funded by treasury bonds. All the new deficit spending is funded by, the trust funds that have been established that might have money.
So here's the deal. When the government does not have enough money to meet its budgetary requirements, typically it will issue treasury bonds. And that's a way of the government raising money. It issues these pieces of paper from out of thin air, and then it just sells them, auctions them out into the market. And the Chinese buy them, and the sovereign wealth funds buy them, and these large pension funds buy them, people's retirements buy them. And then basically it's a promise that the government's going to pay you back this money with an interest rate in the future, with like a return. But now they're not financing this deficit with bonds, because number one, it's getting harder and harder to sell our bonds at this interest rate. And they're digging into these, what they like these, not these piggy banks, well, these slush funds. Like they see it as a slush fund. A slush fund in the fraternity is a pool of money that we all put together to go buy all the alcohol for a party. That is what they call Medicare, and that's what they call these social safety net programs that are billions and billions of dollars. Call them a slush fund, and they've dug into them to pay off the interest on the credit card because they went too crazy in Ibiza. And the only congressman talking about this shit, actually this is a national emergency. This was like the number one voting issue for me after the border, was getting the deficit down. And Doge coming in, I was hopeful, and then that kind of fell apart. So Massey's the last person talking about this in Congress. Everybody's dick riding Trump. Trump came in, intimidated everybody a couple weeks ago when he stepped onto Capitol Hill, scared all the congressmen into voting for the bill. And Massey's the last line of defense between us and another $2 trillion of debt. Our children, myself and your children, having to incur 60% tax rates just to be able to finance this debt. People, if we can't finance $1 trillion a year in credit card interest payments, if we can't do that now, by 2030, the interest on the debt will be more than the amount of money the government brings in. So imagine the interest on your credit card being more than your entire paycheck for the month. Just the interest, not the principal. Forget the mortgage, forget your insurance, forget all that stuff. Just the interest on one credit card is more than your entire, that's 2030. That's a brick wall that we're headed right into. And they're calling Thomas Massey a coward and unpatriotic for being the last line of defense between us and that brick wall. Do you guys understand why I'm getting so pissed about this?
Okay. I'm a little confused on that.
Well, it's like it's like this, Theo.
Uh-huh.
Let's say you saved up for your kids' college.
Okay.
They
Oh, all right, we'll get back to these clips. Jerome Powell is about to hit the stage. If this gets boring as fuck, we'll switch back and forth here. But chart speaks for itself. Picture is worth 1,000 words. I did come to Thomas Massey's defense first and let you know I mean it. Tucker Carlson comes in.
Him. I can't imagine a more American man than Thomas Massey.
That was Tucker Carlson saying he can't imagine a more American man than Thomas Massey. Just saying. Okay. Okay, this was today. George sent this in. This was Trump going at Massey again. Dude. All right, let me give this a fair read real quick. Let me make sure the audio is on for the Fed meeting. Okay. Third-rate Congressman Thomas Massey of the great Commonwealth of Kentucky. All right, I already read the first bit. He's dick riding himself. Big, beautiful bill. I'm going to try my best not to use foul language today. You guys, hold me to a higher standard than our president. He's against all of the above and many other incredible things. Why would anyone want to vote for a so-called congressman, a rhino at best? A rhino is somebody who is who identifies as a Republican, but tends to vote on a lot of Democrat policies. And so he's kind of in the middle between the two parties. An elephant and a donkey is a rhino. People are fucking stupid. Who wants to raise your taxes by 68%, which is what will happen if the great big beautiful bill doesn't pass? Like, this is the lie, right? I just explained to you guys how this bill is going to add $2 trillion to our deficit, or to the national debt, excuse me. Trump is saying that if this bill doesn't pass, we're going to get tax rates of 68%. If we go more in debt, the government's going to need to take more and more of our money to finance it. Just look at Canada. They overspent. They promised way too much entitlements. And then they had to basically tax their people into oblivion just to be able to go month by month to finance their government. It's ridiculous. Okay. He's a loser. See, man, I don't like this. Press conference hasn't started yet, so this is probably a perfect time to go through this clip, which is, oh, the big beautiful bill. This is Thomas Massey shitting on the big beautiful bill. Oh no. Yo, what if wait, this is the House or this is the Senate? Rayburn House Office Building. Funny enough, that's where I used to work. I worked at Canon and I also worked at the Rayburn. This is where all the congressmen's offices are. Massey says that other countries' big banks will stop lending to the U.S.
Committee on Financial Services will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to square a recess at any time. This hearing is entitled the Federal Reserve Semi-Annual Monetary Policy Report. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit extraneous material to the chair for inclusion in the record. I now recognize myself for 4 minutes for an opening statement. Good morning. I want to thank Chair Powell for joining us today. We appreciate your time and look forward to hearing more about the Federal Reserve's outlook on economic and monetary policy. There's been a lot of rhetoric lately, particularly from our friends across the aisle, suggesting that Republicans in the Congress are steering our economy toward a recession. However, the facts tell a different story. 4 months into the Trump administration, American workers and taxpayers are already benefiting from a strong, resilient economy. The Fed noted that growth is solid, and even former Fed officials have dismissed the idea of a recession this year or is near. Compare that to the previous administration. Under President Biden, Americans endured the highest inflation rates in decades, driven by reckless spending and misguided policy decisions. Now, under the Trump administration, inflation has declined to levels lower than those seen before President Biden's flawed so-called American Rescue Plan, and real wages are finally meaningfully growing again. There's always some economic uncertainty when the United States engages in difficult negotiations necessary to secure more open markets for American goods and services. But that uncertainty is not without a strategy.
This hearing is a distraction. Trump is over here talking about Israel. He's like pleading with Israel not to drop the bombs, telling Israel not to do it. He said, Israel, do not drop these bombs. Like, what is happening right now? He's doing diplomacy. There's bombs about to be dropped on Iran. Trump says, Israel, do not drop those bombs. If you do, it's a major violation. Bring your pilots home now. This little sham circus of a hearing, or whatever they want to call it, is just a massive distraction. So I'm going to keep my eye on both. Just keep in mind, this is what's really moving the markets. It's war, real potential for escalation of World War III, or we're all being bamboozled and we're all stooges. And then this is the real circus over here.
Confirmed as vice chair for supervision at the board. Governor Bowman has been a tireless advocate for community banks, and this committee is eager to work with her on policies that enhance our bank's ability to provide greater access to capital and services for our families and businesses across our nation. I look forward to today's hearing, and I yield back the balance of my time. I'll now recognize Mr. Foster on behalf of the ranking member for 4 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, and I will save everyone a little bit of time. Chair, Ranking Member Waters was unavoidably detained. I'll just say a little bit that the markets have kind of spoken on their confidence in the Trump economy. Probably the single simplest metric of that is that the U.S. dollar is down roughly 10%. Okay, this is not a small thing, and it has caused countries around the world to question the primacy of the U.S. dollar going forward. This is one of the worst market responses, I think, to the chaos that we're seeing, the tariffs that are very destructive to international trade, and just everything that the markets are seeing and trying to suffer through. I know I'm contacted all the time by businesses in my district, manufacturing businesses that can't even start thinking about investing with the level of chaos just from the tariff policy alone. Anyway, there's a long set of things we should be talking about, and I'm happy to save some people some time, and let's get to it. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I recognize the chairman of the Task Force on Monetary Policy, Treasury Market Resilience, and Economic Prosperity, Mr. Lucas, for 1 minute for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today's hearing will allow us to evaluate the state of the economy and review the FOMC's policy decisions. It's appropriate to regularly take a step back and assess the central bank's performance and its response.
These are the staffers that wrote all of these talking points for him. He just rolled out of bed for this.
A conversation as the Fed wraps up its 5-year framework review, including a thorough look at the consensus statement, communication strategy, and other guiding policies that will have a profound effect on the lives of every American. Many of these topics we'll discuss today, we've taken a closer look at in the Monetary Policy, Treasury Market Resilience, and Economic Prosperity Task Force. I look forward to building on these conversations here. One issue that I think warrants special attention is the binding nature of the SLR and ESLR on the Treasury market intermediation. I'm glad to see the Fed is looking into this tomorrow, and I hope we'll see meaningful action soon. Chairman Powell, thank you for being here. It's critically important that Congress and the central bank have an open dialogue. Transparency, accountability, honest communications are pillars of our system's success. I look forward to your testimony on the state of the economy and the Fed's plans for the future. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. I recognize the ranking member of the Task Force on Monetary Policy, Treasury Market Resilience, and Economic Prosperity, Mr. Vargas, for 1 minute for an opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and ranking member. And thank you, Chairman Powell, both for your years of public service and for being here today. Since 1977, the Fed has been tasked by Congress with its dual mandate goals of achieving both maximum employment and stable prices. Unfortunately, this administration has made accomplishing these goals more difficult. In the Fed's most recent summary of economic projections, we see a forecast for slower growth, stickier inflation, and rising unemployment, all of which point to a potential stagflation scenario. Whether it's the president's indecision on trade policy, his hiring freezes impacting the collection of economic data, his ballooning of the deficit to cut taxes for the wealthy, or his name calling, All of these actions make it tougher for the Fed to do its job. I look forward to your testimony today, Mr. Powell, Chairman Powell.
Bro, this is a fucking disgrace. Look at this tie. What is it? I told you guys it was a circus, right? I told you guys. Look at this. I get it, right? If you're a pediatrician and you're a doctor for kids, have at it. We're at war. Bro, we're at war. And this is the tie this man showed. His staff let him leave the office with this. Oh, I'm feeling a light mood today. Bro, what?
And I yield back with that.
Gentleman yields back.
I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it through this press conference.
Today, we do welcome the testimony of the Honorable Jerome Powell, Chair of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. Chairman Powell, we thank you for taking time to be with us. You'll be recognized for 5 minutes to give an oral presentation of your written testimony. And without objection, your written testimony will be made part of the record. You're now recognized for 5 minutes. Mike.
Thank you, Chairman Hill, Ranking Member, and other members of the committee. It's great to be back here today. I appreciate the opportunity to present the Federal Reserve's semi-annual monetary policy report. The Federal Reserve remains squarely focused on achieving our dual mandate goals of maximum employment and stable prices for the benefit of the American people. Despite elevated uncertainty, the economy is in a solid position. The unemployment rate remains low, and the labor market is at or near maximum employment. Inflation has come down a great deal, but has been running somewhat above our 2% longer run objective. We are attentive to the risks on both sides of our dual mandate. I will review the current economic situation before turning to monetary policy. Incoming data suggests that the economy remains solid. Following growth of 2.5% last year, GDP was reported to have edged down in the first quarter, reflecting swings in net exports that were driven by businesses bringing in imports ahead of potential tariffs. This unusual swing has complicated GDP measurement. Private domestic final purchases, or PDFP, which excludes net exports, inventory investment, and government spending, grew at a solid 2.5% rate. Within PDFP, growth of consumer spending moderated, while investment in equipment and intangibles rebounded from weakness in the fourth quarter. Surveys of households and businesses, however, report a decline in sentiment in recent months and elevated uncertainty about the economic outlook, largely reflecting trade policy concerns. It remains to be seen how these developments might affect future spending and investment. In the labor market.
Bro, John, is it even worth watching this? I know it's Jay Powell, but like, did you guys hear what he just said? He said in the last few months, consumer sentiment has been weaker than expected. It is yet to be seen how this may affect future sentiment for consumers. People not feeling too good. Me no know what happens later. Thanks, dude. Thanks. I don't fucking go down the street to the palm reader down the street, ask her next. We get a fucking full spectrum view, a holistic perspective of the economy while we're at it.
Inflation has eased significantly from its highs in mid-2022, but remains somewhat elevated relative to our 2% longer run goal.
Let's fact check this.
Estimates based on the Consumer Price Index and other data indicate that total personal consumption expenditures, or PCE prices, rose 2.3% over the 12 months ending in May, and that, excluding the volatile food and energy categories, core PCE prices rose 2.6%. Near-term measures of inflation expectations have moved up over recent months, as reflected in both market and survey-based measures. Respondents to surveys of consumers, businesses, and professional forecasters point to tariffs as the driving factor. Beyond the next year or so, however, most measures of longer-term expectations remain consistent with our 2% inflation goal. Our monetary policy actions are guided by our dual mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. With the labor market at or near maximum employment and inflation remaining somewhat elevated, the Federal Open Market Committee has maintained the target range for the federal funds rate at 4.25% to 4.5% since the beginning of the year. We've also continued to reduce our holdings of Treasury and agency mortgage-backed securities and beginning in April, further slowed the pace of this decline to facilitate a smooth transition to ample reserve balances. We will continue to determine the appropriate stance of monetary policy based on the incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks. Policy changes continue to evolve and their effects on the economy remain uncertain. The effects of tariffs will depend, among other things, on their ultimate level. Expectations of that level, the economic effects, reached a peak in April and have since declined. Even so, increases in tariffs this year are likely to push up prices and weigh on economic activity. The effects on inflation could be short-lived, reflecting a one-time shift in the price level. It's also
Did he just say short-lived? Short-lived? English?
would depend on the size of the tariff effects, on how long it takes for them to pass through
He's
fully
sweating.
into prices, and ultimately on keeping longer-term inflation expectations well anchored. Our obligation is to keep longer-term inflation expectations well anchored and to prevent a one-time increase in the price level from becoming an ongoing inflation problem. As we act to meet that obligation, we will balance our maximum employment and price stability mandates, keeping in mind that without price stability, we cannot achieve the long periods of strong labor market conditions that benefit all Americans. For the time being, we are well positioned to wait to learn more about the likely course of the economy before considering any adjustments to our policy stance. To conclude, we understand that our actions affect communities, families, and businesses across the country. Everything we do is in service to our public mission. We at the Fed will do everything we can to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll now turn to member questions. I recognize my
What a joke.
questions. Over the past few weeks, our Democratic colleagues have suggested the following. After the initial release of the GDP report, the president is driving the economy into a recession. Chairman Powell, the latest FOMC statement described economic activity had to continue to expand at a solid pace, and you just reiterated that in your testimony this morning. In your view, is the term recession and the economy growing at a solid pace, are those synonymous with each other?
I would say no.
And you note that the labor market continues strong, the economy is at a standard pace, and you also referenced in your testimony that that first quarter
which was all true. We did fact check this. It does check out.
To try to avoid tariff impacts. Also, I looked at the Atlanta Fed GDP Now model, which forecasts GDP growth for the second quarter of this year at nearly 4%, with core GDP forecast at 2%. Does that Atlanta model suggest a recession to you?
No, I would say it doesn't.
So in looking at your remarks about tariffs today, and then the ones that you made during March and April, I was looking back at a Fed study that noted that up until March, tariffs have already been partially passed through in consumer prices, leading to a contribution of merely 1/10 percentage point increase in core PCE prices. And a Harvard study last week showed that prices have only modestly adjusted since the announcement of tariffs. Finally, the longer-term inflation expectations remain consistent with the 2% goal. Governor Waller laid out a pathway that allows for rate cuts, provided that average effective tariff rates remain close to 10%, or I assume he means 10% or lower. The labor market remains solid. Prices continue to disinflate. So given that data I've outlined, I'm sure data that you're very familiar with, for the economy to avoid persistent inflation, do you concur with Governor Waller that there is a pathway for good news as it relates to the regulatory policies, the tax policies that I've discussed in a world with lower tariff rates?
So first, I wouldn't comment on any other FOMC members' comments one way or the other, but I will say this. I think many paths are possible here, and certainly the one you mentioned is a possible one. We could see inflation come in not as strong as we expect. And if that were the case, that would tend to suggest cutting sooner. We could see the labor market weakening, and that would also suggest cutting sooner. On the other hand, if we see inflation coming in higher, or if the labor market were to remain strong, then we would probably be moving later. So I think a range of possible paths are possible, and certainly the one you mentioned is one of them.
In February of 2021, you told us in this committee that you would stay in your lane and not comment on President Biden's proposal for the American Rescue
Here it comes. They're going to ask him about shit that has nothing to do with his job.
federal spending. And, you know, you said it was an issue, but that you would stay in your lane and not comment on it. But
Here's the deflection where he's going to stay in his lane and not comment on it.
idea of tariffs being set by the executive branch. So are tariffs in your lane, but a huge fiscal spending by the Biden administration not in your lane? Explain to the committee why you chose to be silent in February of 21, but outspoken this spring.
Sure. So we haven't commented, and it would be inappropriate for us to comment on the policy of tariffs. We don't have a view. It's not our job.
Told you.
We just wouldn't do that. And just as we wouldn't comment on the reconciliation package that you're working on right now. We're not commenting on tariffs. What our job is inflation, keeping inflation under control, and also keeping maximum employment. And when policies have what appear to be short and medium term implications, meaningful implications for that, then they kind of, not the policies themselves, but the inflation becomes our job.
Yeah. You know, my views on price stability, I think it's a first among equals in your.
He always paints himself as the cleanup crew. Like, you guys are responsible for this. We just got to come and clean up after and make sure the dollar's stable.
That before, but I was very curious about your thoughts on former president of the Cleveland Bank, Loretta Mester's quote that I read from last fall. She says, "I think that maximum employment is the maximum level of employment consistent with price stability." In other words, she elegantly ties that together, that price stability is what you can have more control over rather than, you know, all these other factors that enter the employment picture like legislative and executive branch. What's your thought about her quote?
I personally think that's a very reasonable way to think about it.
Thank you very much. I yield back. The gentleman from New York is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning.
You could have ChatGPT'd better questions than that. That was pitiful.
Here. Last week, the FOMC decided to maintain the target range for the federal funds rate at 4.25% to 4.5%. While I was not surprised by the decision to hold rates steady, I was surprised by the committee's revised forecast since March, which represented a decrease of 0.3 percentage points for GDP, a similar increase for core PCE, and an uptick in the unemployment rate to 4.5%. Can you explain the incoming data that the committee has seen since March that caused it to make these adjustments?
Sure. So first of all, these are individual. This is not a committee forecast. These are just individuals submitting their own personal, forecasts, and we don't bless those as a committee. But I think people are looking at the incoming data and having a range of different judgments. If you look at the range, if you look at the central tendency, you'll see that it covers quite a wide range. Those are the medians that you're talking about. I think so. Inflation is projected to have moved up because of what we've seen, particularly from tariffs. And I think if you look at other outside forecasters, you'll see very much the same thing.
And what data are you looking for?
Well, we look at the incoming data on. We look at our own forecast and we ask ourselves what's likely to happen. Monetary policy has to be forward-looking. A forecast is a prediction of what's going to happen in the future.
Thank you. In its statement, the committee announced that it will continue to monitor the implications of incoming data and adjust the stand of monetary policy as appropriate. Some analysts predict 2 rate cuts by the end of the year are still on the table. Is this a fair and accurate assumption? And what incoming data will the committee need to see to consider these cuts?
What will actually happen with rates is going to depend on the path of the economy, and that's highly uncertain. So I would just say what that means at this moment in time is that a significant majority of the committee, but also there's a pretty significant minority that doesn't agree, but a significant majority feels it will be appropriate to reduce rates later this year. And what that means is that each of those persons who wrote down a cut in rates later this year, they think that there's some state of the world where inflation doesn't prove to be as high, or the labor market weakens, or some combination of those two things, that it will turn out to be more likely than not appropriate to reduce policy rates, subject to great uncertainty. I mean, we will, the story has been evolving and our thinking has been adapting and that will continue.
Thank you. Chair Powell, although a ceasefire has been tentatively reached in the Middle East, the situation still has the potential to open global and energy markets, especially if the ceasefire is broken. While at this point, Iran is seen as...
Bro, she asked, what do we have to do to get you to bring rates down, and about Iran in the first 5 minutes? And it didn't even lube them up or not, just threw them straight into the fire.
Situation and incorporating those assessments as it considers
People, did I call it or not?
adjustment to economic projections and its stand on monetary policy.
So I think it's too early to know what any economic implications might be, and I would not want to speculate. Like everyone else, we are, of course, watching the situation.
Thank you. And Chair Powell, after reviewing the economic data following the meeting last week, it seems to me that the committee is indicating that we could be headed for a situation where inflation accelerates while unemployment rises and growth become more sluggish. In this scenario, this will put the Fed's dual mandate of maximum employment and price stability in tension with one another. In this scenario, how does the Fed balance these priorities in order to achieve both mandates?
So let me say that we're not facing that right now, and that isn't really our forecast that we will face such an issue in a serious way. But if that does happen, then what we do is we look at the two goals and we see which one of them is farther from its goal. Two variables, is maximum employment or price stability farther from its goal, and we prefer the one that's farther than its goal. And then we also ask ourselves for any central bank. And I would say again, we're not in that situation right now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Oh, welcome back, Walter. Well, you know what they should do is they should get a panel of top economists to grill Jerome Powell during these. That's what they should do. Not a bunch of sellout congressmen with their staffers ChatGPT and questions. They should get a full panel of top economists to grill Jerome Powell during these semi-annual reports. The pushback on those last questions were so, I don't know, man. You could watch a 3-minute YouTube video and get the information. Why are you asking him, what are we going to do if inflation rises and unemployment goes up at the same time? They're going to drop rates. What do you think they're going to do?
As you noted, and I'm paraphrasing, that some Federal Reserve officials began to incorporate preliminary conditional estimates of how fiscal policies might impact forecasts. This seems inconsistent, and I sidebarred with the chair to say, okay, did I hear this correctly? His question and sort of your answer. What I heard is that there was a belief that the IRA would not be inflationary, but that tariffs could be. Therefore, suddenly you and others were commenting on tariffs. And for the institution, I know you try to be consensus driven. Why are there FOMC participants making fiscal policy assumptions into their forecasting when you yourself said that fiscal policies need to be articulated before the FOMC can make a plausible assessment into their implications?
All these questions are, why did you comment on this thing about Trump, but you never said a word when Biden did this other thing? That's what they're all doing.
Biased.
Hey, you commented on this Trump thing, but when Biden did this inflation, the IRA's, the Inflation Reduction Act, the $2 trillion omnibus bill, you were silent.
To make the same
middle school
policy assumptions
worse than middle school.
Or if not, shouldn't each participant disclose what assumptions that they're using and building into that? So here's a question.
That's a great question. That really, when the summary of economic projections was originally designed and put into effect in this way, the way it works is that individuals are free to make whatever assumptions they want, and they do disclose them. They disclose them in their speeches and things like that. So there will be situations where some people incorporate something and others don't, and we we try to be transparent about that. But that's kind of the way it works. When I say we don't take it into account, I'm really talking about policy and the committee as a whole, where we won't take things into account until we know.
And you believe that the participants disclose their assumptions when they're doing their forecasts?
Well, I think they do.
I'm going to pause for a quick second. I don't think that we're going to get a trade here. I don't think that we're going to get that flush to the downside or to the upside probably for another like half hour, maybe as soon as they go for recess. That's when we're going to get the push. So hang tight. If you're looking for a trade, there's small ranges. There's this high to this low, that already got rejected. I would just wait for the top of the range or the bottom. Be patient. Give it like an hour or so.
Do that in their speeches. Yeah, each people go out. You may have noticed there are a lot of speeches.
Well,
And
I guess the opaqueness of the Fed has been something over the arc of my 15 years on this committee has been one that has been debated greatly, including auditing the Fed and a number of other things that have gone on. I've got here a brief moment. I do feel like I need to touch on interest rates. Not to be a shock. You asked how the family.
He just mentioned auditing the Fed. That's like the boogeyman word for any Fed chairman, by the way. Auditing the Fed.
It's been strong. We need more labor. We need a few other things on that. What's happening? But I mean, I think there's no recession. That's been established. There's no hyperinflation, or certainly not as what some had been projecting. Yet there seems to be higher than expected, or certainly desired interest rates for many of us. And I'm curious how high interest rates, they hurt Americans who are paying car loans, credit cards, mortgages. You had FHFA Director Pulte asking for lower interest rates, which would obviously impact home buyers as well. So what is it that's keeping, in your mind, the Fed from what many of us believe is the right?
Because prices will go up if they drop the rates. You're welcome.
Of England, the European Central Bank, the Swiss.
Because it would lead to asset bubbles if we drop rates too soon.
Page 33.
You're welcome.
As where you're laying that out.
I just answered the question before Buddy's even done asking the question.
Employment, is it because of those tariffs concerns that you said weren't part of the analysis? Was it energy, groceries, durable goods? Why?
So you're right that if you just look in the rearview mirror and look at the existing data that we've seen, you can make a good argument that would call for us to be at a neutral level, which would be, a couple of cuts or maybe more kind of thing. The reason we're not is the forecast by all professional forecasters that I know of on the outside and the Fed do expect a meaningful increase in inflation over the course of this year. When I said we weren't going to talk about tariffs and inflation, that was to say, until we see what the policies are. And so now we know a lot more. It's 6 months since I said that. So anyway, I'm happy to continue this with you.
He just said to expect inflation. Now that we've seen 6 months of these tariffs and what to expect, he's saying that, yeah, we're going to be seeing some inflation for the rest of the year. That was a slight little, I hate when they do this, man. The guy monologued the question and then didn't let Jerome Powell do his piece.
The term they use in the counties that I represent.
Oh my God. Oh, no. Bro, look at this. What is these glass? Bro, what is? Dude, this is disgraceful. What is this? Bro, okay. I'm debating whether to unmute this or just go listen to Tucker or Theo Vaughn. Bro, the last thing I want to hear is Rashida Tlaib talk about finance, wearing these goofy ass the designer from The Incredibles. Hold on. I can't be the only one. The designer lady, bro. Somebody tell me Edna. Nah, not close. Nah, you know what? I'll let it slide. Close enough. Let's listen to somebody and tell it. Let me get Thomas Massey on here talking about the big, beautiful bill and why it's a scam.
There's, I know some of my reasons, but I don't know what everything that's in the bill.
After listening to these, you know what? I'm going to let you guys listen to Thomas Massey, and then I'm going to play Rashida. You know what? Let me play Rashida Tlaib first, so you guys can hear the contrast here between
and more burdensome housing costs to years to come. So Chairman Powell, I'm looking at this monetary, whatever policy framework that you guys have put together.
Monetary, whatever framework.
And again, I'm trying to understand how you're looking at this in the housing crisis. Do you believe it's eroding new rental supply under construction right now, leading to high inflation in future years?
So I think there are two things going on quickly. One is just there's a longer run shortage of housing in the United States, which there's nothing that the Fed can do about. That's not something we can affect.
Well,
There's also, if I may say, in the short run, rates are high and that's going to weigh on housing activity. But the best thing we can do for the housing market, the absolute best thing, is to restore price stability so that rates come down and so that rates can be at a
But don't
level
you
of.
think that the restrictive monetary policy the framework you all put together undermines long-term price stability right now?
Wow, that's a good follow-up.
No, I mean, I think it
you're
restores price stability. The point of higher rates is to, and
You
it
don't
does
think
affect.
higher rates is impacting future supply of housing?
Oh,
So I think what that does is, I think interest sensitive sectors like housing are very much directly affected when we cut rates or when we raise rates. That's right. But that's
Yeah.
part of the mechanism for restoring general price stability.
So keeping the high interest rates does not impact future supply of housing?
It does not, over the long.
To go back to talk to.
bro. I spoke way too soon, bro. She's cooking him in the Edna from the Incredibles glasses, bro. Bro, she's cooking him. Listen, the interest rates are high, so none of us are buying homes, right? And so these builders are not going to go out and build excess homes because there's no demand, which makes the prices go up even higher. And so, of course, this backwards ass justification that somehow keeping rates higher for longer is going to somehow bring price stability to the housing market. There's asset bubbles everywhere, in the stock market, in crypto, in maybe like federal real estate and commercial real estate. But when it comes to residential, I think when it comes to residential, I guess it's like a chicken or the egg thing. Yeah, if everybody wanted a house because interest rates were lower, builders would start building. I think Jerome Powell got cooked by Rashida Tlaib in the glasses. I would just leave, dude. I would just resign.
Over the long run,
Women that the
the
study.
Fed will not be, our policy will not be a driver of longer run housing supply. in the United
So,
States.
okay, let me ask you, what is the difference? And I'm honestly confused. I want to learn here. And I'm sure people listening to this want to learn. What is the difference between demand-driven rent inflation and supply-driven rent inflation?
Oh my God. I apologize formally for roasting Rashida Tlaib. Wow.
Inflation.
She's reading
Like,
my mind.
you guys use these terminology. What is that? How do I communicate that to the public? What is the difference between supply-driven versus demand-driven rent?
Those are not terms that we use particularly often.
What's
but
supply-driven formula?
that would mean that there's not enough supply to meet demand. But at the same time, it also means there's more demand than there is supply.
So are you guys ignoring that?
No, but as I said again, our policies will not affect in the long run, either demand or supply in housing.
I'm being serious, y'all. We're talking about a housing crisis that is getting worse right now because we're not paying attention to future instability that the current rates, and you can raise your eyebrows and all this stuff behind. I don't know. I mean, do you understand? Like, I come from a community right now that I believe is now being impacted by the current framework that you're putting together, that I do feel like it's going to be long-term effects on the housing crisis, and you're ignoring it.
No, we're not. Actually, we think the very best thing we can do is to fully restore price stability at the aggregate level. That will be the best thing for homeowners and for home builders and everybody else. That's in the long run, that is the single thing that Congress has assigned us to do.
But you see where I'm coming from? It is impacting future supply of housing, right?
Not in the long run, no.
Okay.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Stile, who's also the chair of our subcommittee on digital assets, financial technology, and artificial intelligence. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Hill. Thank you, Chairman Powell, for being with us today. I want to dive into two actions the Fed's recently taken to get a little additional color on. Yesterday, the Fed announced that reputational risk would no longer be a component in bank exams I viewed that positively. I viewed the reputational risk as often being a catch-all for political bias. I think it's positive to depoliticize bank exams and instead focus on the core and measurable risks. Could you provide color as to whether or not any new information came to light that led to the decision of the Fed to remove that yesterday?
I'm not aware of any new information. No, we just think it's the right thing to do, and of course made an announcement on Monday under Governor Vice Chair Bowman's leadership.
Why would it not have been done previously if it's the right thing to do? I agree with you, it's the right thing to do. Why was it? Any timeline as to why that was done yesterday versus previously?
No, I think this is a problem that we came to understand as a problem over the course of the last couple of years, and began considering what's going on here. We're hearing a lot of reports of debanking and that sort of thing. And over the course of really 2024, came to the view that this was a serious problem that we need to address. And we've said that publicly, and now we're doing this, and so are the other agencies, by the way.
I appreciate you taking that action. I do agree that there were real political bias in some of those exams, in particular as it related to regulated entities engaged in the digital asset space. Let me shift into the digital asset space if I can. Another action recently taken by the Fed, the Novel Activities Supervision Program was ended and withdrew several statements on digital asset related risks that deterred bank involvement. In particular, you and the Fed and others, the Fed have spoken positively about the House and Senate work to regulate stablecoin, in particular, a real opportunity to dollarize the globe and be a significant purchaser of U.S. Treasuries. Following that action by the Fed, have you seen an identifiable shift in banks or other regulated entities as it relates to engagement in the digital asset space?
I wouldn't be the one to be picking that up first, but what I do see is a very significant change in the tone, and it really does reflect evolving thinking and the evolving status of the crypto industry. And I would expect over time we'll see more activity.
How is the Fed evaluating and overseeing banks or other regulated entities that are in the digital assets or crypto space?
Our view is that banks get to decide who their customers are. That's not our decision. And so banks are free to provide banking services to the crypto industry, to crypto companies and bank.
Why does Trump keep saying the 250th anniversary, bro? I thought that was this year. The Independence Day is 1776. This year will be 249 years old. Bro, I think somebody lied to Trump, told him it was the 250th anniversary. And he keeps saying this July 4th, he's saying, as we begin the celebration of our country's 250th birthday, we need to pass the big, beautiful bill. I hope he's not talking about this year. Somebody needs to check him. Because I did the math. 1776. That's 249 years old.
Banks are also free to conduct crypto activities as long as they do so in a way that is, protective of safety and soundness.
Thank you very much. Let me shift gears because I want to give you just a little bit of an opportunity to comment on the housing sector once again, but give you a little freedom here to speak to that area. You correctly are trying to balance inflation and price stability, but also higher rates have a significant impact on the housing market as shelter and housing costs are a significant driver of why many families can't afford the things that they need. Can you provide colors to how you're analyzing the impact that housing and shelter costs have on families and on inflation with your desire to maintain price stability at the interest rates that are currently set by the Fed?
Sure. So, we realize that people are feeling high housing costs and high financing costs. In terms of inflation, we look at something called owner's equivalent rent and rentals, and that's meant to capture both rented housing and owned housing. And it's been very sticky. It's been one of the stickiest parts of inflation. I'm happy to say now it actually is coming down quite regularly. That's very good news. That's been the part, really, it's been the service inflation that's been stickier than other parts of inflation. So that's good news for people, I think, and it is showing through into measured inflation now. Again, in the long run, the best thing we can do is restore price stability and let the market work. Even then, though, we're still going to have a housing shortage.
What data do you think is leading to the reduction of the rent equivalent?
I just think it took time. So the thought is when you would think that if rents come up every year, you would think it would take 1 year or 2 years for a lack of growth in rents to show up in a lack of growth in housing prices. It turns out it takes 4 years or 3 years. If you're an existing tenant, it's a complicated thought, but if you're an existing tenant, you don't actually catch up the way you would if new tenants came in. And so that's made the measurement of inflation stickier. But I'm happy to say we've been through that period now, and we are really seeing now housing services inflation pretty close to where it was when inflation was solidly at 2%.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California, Mr. Liccardo, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chairman, thank you for your testimony today. I appreciate that your dual mandate is full employment and price stability, and I appreciate your efforts on behalf of our country to achieve those. My understanding is that critical data is collected by the Bureau of Labor Statistics to help formulate the indicators that you rely on, that we rely on to understand unemployment rates, CPI, and other inflation indicators. We are certainly hearing a lot about the impacts of DOGE on our workforce, and specifically about the elimination of many of those positions in BLS. And now we have a proposal in front of Congress to cut $56 million from that agency. Are you concerned about the ability of your team to get accurate data and about the ability to have reliable indicators to make good decisions upon?
I wouldn't say that I'm concerned about the data today, although clearly there has been a very mild degradation of the scope of the surveys and things like that. But I would say the direction of travel is something I'm concerned about, and that is measuring the U.S. economy carefully and well is a project that's been going on, and we're getting better at it for 100 years and more. And it's really important, not just for the Fed, but for Congress and for businesses, frankly, to know what really is going on in the economy. What's happening? Is growth high? Is it low? And all those sorts of things. So I think it's a smart investment to just continually try to get better at measurement of what's happening in the economy. And I don't like to see that, the kind of stories I'm reading and the idea being that the data is going to become more volatile and less reliable. That'll make it more difficult for the private sector and for you and for us. And I don't like to see that direction.
I agree. Thank you. I appreciate that it's not your role to comment on the advisability of specific policies, but given your critical role in ensuring price stability and reducing inflation, I have had conversations with, quite recently, just a week ago, with a C-suite executive of a major world global retailer who informed me, because I asked, why aren't we seeing the impact of these tariffs and price data yet? And he said, it's coming in the third quarter, because it takes time for tariffs to work their way through distribution chain. Often what you have on the shelf today may have been imported 2 or 3 months ago. Is that your understanding? Do you anticipate there may be impacts down the road?
Yeah, that's very much what I hear. I happened to meet with an unusually large number of business people in this last FOMC cycle. And that's a typical thing that they'll say, especially the retailers, that what's being sold now was in inventory in February, let's say, and it just isn't showing up yet. So we do expect to show up, tariff inflation to show up more. But I want to be honest, we really don't know how much of that's going to be passed through to the consumers. We just don't know. And we won't know until we see it. It could be lower than we expect. It could be higher. We have to wait and see, which is kind of what we're doing.
I appreciate the uncertainty. Another thing he told me had me very concerned was that often they will increase prices on goods not subjected to tariffs to compensate for the very substantial losses they have to suffer with the increase of tariffs on relatively price elastic goods. So in other words, necessities will also tend to bear a higher price, even if they're not subjected to tariffs. Is that your understanding of the potential impacts?
That very much is something that companies will tell you that they do. If they can't cover the losses on the thing that's being tariffed, they'll find other ways to do it. We actually don't have prominent examples of that yet, but that's certainly a possibility. And that did happen in the last tariff episode with washing machines and dryers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And finally, there's indications in the introduction of the report that The Fed is losing its ability as we see interest rates getting closer and closer to the minimum threshold, the ability to stimulate this economy in times of recession. We haven't had a recession, or at least we haven't had an extended recession in a decade and a half. I am particularly concerned now as we are looking at debt that is being considered to be imposed on future generations by this particular bill. Could there be a combination of very high debt and very little room to move in monetary policy that could undermine our ability to respond to the next recession?
So we faced that issue quite a bit in the era of very low interest rates, but we're at higher levels of interest rates now, so there's significantly more room to cut than there was then.
Thank you.
Gentleman yield back. Gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Fitzgerald, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman Powell, thanks for being here today. Appreciate it. I want to go back to something we had some brief discussions about this in the past, but in September of 2024, with core inflation still being above target and the labor market was holding steady at the time, the Fed made a decision to cut rates by a full 0.5 percentage point. It kind of raised some serious questions as to whether or not the data truly supported such a move at that time. And I think some of us were surprised that it was a full 0.5%. So can you revisit that again, what the Fed was thinking at that time? Because it seems to be somewhat of an enigma now. It stands out as, why was this done? Why was the 0.5% done at that point?
I'd be glad to. So first of all, actually the inflation and employment readings were very similar then to what they are now. They weren't terribly
True.
a tenth or two.
Right.
But the difference then was you mentioned that the labor market was stable. It wasn't. The unemployment rate had actually gone up almost a full percentage point. I was very clear about this. We were very clear about it in real time too. The concern at that time was that there really hasn't been an experience, or hadn't been an experience in the modern era in which the unemployment rate has gone up close to 1% that hasn't been followed by much higher levels of unemployment and a recession. So we were looking at that and saying, and remember at that point, at the point we're talking about, the federal funds rate was 5.3%. So definitely very restrictive level. We were the last of the big central banks to cut. So we wanted to make a statement that we were supportive of the labor market and not just inflation. We've been focusing on inflation. I was quite clear about this. So that it was all about the labor market. Inflation was the same and unemployment was roughly the same, but it was the rate of change with the unemployment rate that raised a lot of concerns. And remember, we were being criticized for being late to cut. So we could have done 25. If we'd done 25 in July, we were criticized for not cutting in July. Instead, we cut 50 in September. And it seemed like the right thing to do. And at the end of the day, we do what we think is
It was the dumbest move ever. They were just trying to pump the stock market before Biden left office. It's the only reason why they held off on the July cut last year, and they just doubled up on September for no reason at all.
Stop. Yeah. So
they just said they're not going to drop rates unless there's a recession, people lose jobs, or unless there's a recession. And then they just ended up doing a 50 basis point cut last September for political reasons, just to help Biden get a boost during election season. I mean, this is obvious.
Bring it up because it seems like everything's in place right now to kind of do the same thing, make the same move. I know this morning already, you've talked a little bit about where you were on inflation right now and kind of what you're watching, but is there any lesson there? I mean, are we in a position where it would be appropriate to do something as big as a 0.5% cut again?
Well, look, as I said earlier, if you just look at the basic data and don't look at the forecast, you would say that we would have continued cutting. The difference, of course, is at this time, all forecasters are expecting pretty soon that
we're about 30 points away from the sell zone. I'm looking at my trade evade over here on the other screen. So 365. That's my sell zone. I'm going to start layering. I'll probably layer a tester entry around 60, and then just 10-point intervals. So 370, 380, and that's probably going to be it.
But that is the difference between then and now. Then inflation was forecasted to continue to come down. Here it's forecasted to go up by all forecasters. So, and again, we're not overreacting to that. We're just saying, hey, let's, as long as the economy's strong, we can take a little bit of a pause here. And that's what we're doing. And again, continue to adapt as the data comes in. If we see data that suggests
Oh, 2018 is when Trump waged a tariff war, not 2020. So 2020 is an anomaly. And so you would ask, in comparison, 2016, how does this supply chain shock compare and what's going to be the impact on inflation?
Thank you, Mr. Fitzgerald. Gentleman,
going to produce big increases, you know, that would matter. And if we saw the labor market weakening, that would matter too. But we don't see those things.
What about supply chain? In 2020, that was a big issue, obviously related to COVID. But I know myself and other members, when we're in our districts and we're specifically talking to light manufacturing, there's concerns about the supply chain. Is that part of the data package that you review when you make a decision about where we're headed in the future?
Very much so. You know, I think that's one of the great, well, won't call it a great thing.
Gentleman,
One of the
Simon.
lessons to be taken from the last episode is supply chains really matter. We're watching that carefully. It's too soon to say really on that. We're not seeing it yet, but we.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, Chairman. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Fitzgerald. Gentleman from New Jersey, Schottenheimer, you recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Powell, as a member of the Intelligence Committee, I'm deeply concerned about the threat of Iranian cyber attacks on our financial system as retaliation for our strikes on their nuclear facilities. In its cybersecurity report last year, the Fed acknowledged that critical infrastructure, including financial services, is at risk with rising geopolitical tensions. Iran has a history of targeting American infrastructure companies and financial institutions and banks, which could obviously threaten and cause economic damage. What actions is the Fed taking now to monitor and defend against Iranian or proxy cyber threats targeting our country's financial institutions?
So we're in touch with the other regulators and the parts of the government that work on cyber, as you know, and you know, we're in touch with the banks to say, you know, for people to be on the alert for things like that to happen. And also,
I told you guys, it's boring, it's a circus, and it's a distraction. And the market's really not going to give us that pump until he stops speaking. So basically, here's how the markets work, is they grind your patience. If you're like counting the clock, right? If you're like hand wringing or you're sort of like counting the minutes, like it's the end of class, you're going to be cooked, because they grind down that muscle, that willpower fatigue is what I call it. And then as soon as it's ground down, then you kind of get off the charts, and then the market moves in one candle. So I will recommend this to you guys. If you're not a very patient person or you find yourself having trouble waiting, then set alerts, check back every 15 minutes, right? Set timers on your phone, check back every 30-minute candle or 15-minute candle. That way you know that it's going to take at least a 15-minute candle to get to the entry zone. And so you're not going to miss anything. And if the market does enter your zone and you're not watching, the alert should let you know either on your computer or your phone. Okay. Now, the second piece is staying busy. So you can't put half of your effort into work and half of your effort into trading, because then you're just doing shitty work both ends. When you have a clear, like a disciplined system of setting alerts and kind of checking the market at, you know, like, so you just don't have the phone in your hand or your laptop in your face the whole day. You're kind of just watching candle by candle. Instead, discipline equals freedom. Okay. So that's my piece of advice for folks who are struggling to wait. The rest of you guys, Chartaddicts members, we do this. This is a distraction, circus show. What are they distracting us from is the question. Because I'm seeing that Iran was about to bomb, or Israel was about to bomb Iran, and the planes just turned around because Trump sent a tweet saying, Israel, don't do it. Trump sent a tweet saying, Israel, don't bomb or don't drop the bombs. And then the planes turned around. We are being played. They're all working together. We are all getting played. We are the joke. Iran. I'm sorry, I have to find this tweet. This is war over here. Okay, so this was 2 hours ago. Israel, do not drop the bombs. If you do, it's a major violation. Bring your pilots home now. Donald J. Trump, President of the United States. This feels like a conversation he had with the Israelis, where he said, let's do a show of strength so that our counterparties at Iran and Qatar can respect us. So you guys go and do this air raid, fly over Iran. I'm going to send out this tweet saying no, don't do it. And then you're going to turn around and you're going to let them know that you guys listen to me. So when we do these negotiations, they take them serious. That's the charade that I just feel like I just watched. Or we can get back to Jerome Powell talking about the ESLR.
Not our job, and it's not something we take into consideration in making monetary policy. That's really elected people's jobs. And I would add that, for some time now, the U.S. federal fiscal policy has been on an unsustainable path. And, I'll limit myself to that.
Called it again. It's not my job. You guys fucked up the budget. We're here to do cleanup. 30 points away from entry.
With the higher cost of borrowing and putting off bigger purchases on things like cars and homes. As a result, their wallets being crushed by these price hikes and obviously the president's tariffs. What do you have to say to Jersey families who are struggling with higher costs and how you look at how they should forecast themselves for their own families?
We're committed to returning inflation sustainably to 2% and keeping it there in the long run. And what we're doing now is we had cut rates by 100 basis points, so they've come down quite a bit. And, when the time is right, I expect that will continue. And that will depend on economic factors, in the coming months for starters.
Thank you. I yield back. Thank you, sir.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Nebraska, the chair of our Housing and Insurance Subcommittee, Mr. Flood, you're recognized 4 or 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Powell, later this week, the banking agencies will be proposing changes to the supplementary leverage ratio, which we think are long overdue, considering the Fed in 2021 indicated that they would soon put out proposals.
The Fed is not expecting to get inflation back to their long-run target of 2% until 2027. 2027, people. They're not expecting to drop the federal funds rate below 3 until 2027. So if you guys want to buy a house or a car between now and 2027, kiss that goodbye.
Yields down 30 to 7.
But it's only a year. So at least you know when the deadline is.
The Treasury Secretary's comments on the potential positive impact of SLR reform on the Treasury market, and what is the rationale for not excluding Treasuries from the SLR calculation in the proposed rule?
So I agree that when the leverage ratio is binding, it discourages banks from undertaking low margin, fairly safe activities such as mediation in the Treasury markets. So this should encourage more mediation. I don't have a numerical estimate of how much that would matter, but I do think it would matter. I think it was important. I've supported leverage ratio reform for a very long time, since before 2021.
Chairman,
in terms of the structure of the thing, I think we're seeking comment on a particular proposal that doesn't involve exclusion, but we're also asking a question about exclusion.
Mr. Chairman, considering the Fed temporarily excluded Treasuries from the SLR calculation during the COVID pandemic, were you aware of any safety and soundness or financial stability problems that arose as a result of that decision? And if not, why was that relief terminated in 2021?
So that was an emergency measure. From the beginning and end, it was an emergency measure. I think, my long-held view is that we should have a permanent measure, and now we're going to. And we have an open board meeting on Wednesday afternoon. And after I finish my hearing on this,
that ain't nobody reading all that, little bro.
Proposal out for comment.
Thank you. In March, the Federal Reserve,
except my autistic ass is going to read all of it,
announced that they intend to issue a notice of proposed rulemaking to repeal the 2023 Community Reinvestment Act and replace it with the legacy CRA framework. Nearly 3 months have passed since this announcement. What is the status of this project?
Well, we're going to do what we said we were going to do. It's just a question of execution, and I think you'll see that coming. This would be so Vice Chair Bowman has the job of sequencing these things, and that one's certainly coming.
Do you intend to issue a proposal that will be a clean rescission and replacement of that rulemaking, or are you considering amendments to the legacy rule?
I, honestly don't know. We'll come back to you on that.
So we should know more later this week.
We might, yeah.
Okay.
You're never going to hear back from him.
Build off of what Congressman Style asked previously on the supervision of novel activities program. Do you feel any changes could be made to it to encourage innovation, and do you anticipate any such changes to the program?
I do. And I also think Governor Bowman, now Vice Chair Bowman, is someone who is actually deeply knowledgeable and experienced in supervision. And
Yo, I'm making a prediction here. Write this down. President Bowman will be nominated for the next Fed chairman. Vice Chair Bowman will be nominated. That's their next stooge up in line, by the way. They've been oiling him up for this position.
Today, I appreciate your service to the country. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the ranking member of our full committee, Mrs. Waters, for 5 minutes.
Oh my God, no. The last thing I'm hearing is Maxine Waters. Oh no. Somebody drill into my ears, please. No.
It seems like it's one of those things you hear about during the election cycle, and that's about it, you know?
We're going to play this Massey and Theo Von clip while Maxine Waters rambles.
Like we're going to balance the budget, and it never happened. No one ever balances the budget. Like, do you
This is elder abuse.
think anyone, either one of these parties even want to balance the budget?
No, they're not serious about it. It's why I built the debt badge, to like shove it in their face every day. And they're still not concerned about it. I mean, they're a little bit concerned, but as long as they can get reelected, they're not that concerned.
Right.
And I don't blame them for all of it. I blame the American people who keep reelecting people who, because they tell them you can have these things and it won't cost anything. So I hear people talk about like mass deportations, and there's 100 billion to DHS and 50 billion to DOJ to do mass deportations. Well, we know it doesn't cost that. Whatever Trump has intended to do, it's not going to cost $150 billion. But people say, I don't care what it costs. And the reason they say I don't care what it costs is they don't think they're paying it.
Yeah.
They don't care what anything costs. They don't care what war in the Middle East costs because they don't see that they're paying it.
Well, it's all gotten so confusing. And when you start with communication with people, even on a financial front, of this Hogwartsian number. Okay?
Yes. Yeah.
When you start, because we all learn basic math in school.
Yeah.
Some of us learn algebra. Some of us going to learn some higher maths, right?
All right, NASDAQ just hit entry zone. Did I get executed? Not yet. I did not get executed. I want to wait for one more push up, and I'm going to enter a tester manually. Is Maxine Waters done rambling? Oh, she is.
Or March. So we think we should start to see this over the summer, in the June numbers and in the July numbers. And if we don't, I think we're learning here. If we see less pass through, there aren't historical experiences we can consult here really. So it may turn out that the pass through is less or more than we think. And I think we're going to be learning, we'll get a number for June, an inflation number for June. We'll learn something then. We'll get it for July as we go through the summer. We should start seeing this. And if we don't, I think we're perfectly open to the idea that the pass through will be less than we think. And if so, that'll matter for our policy.
Well, I've been talking with a lot of my constituents about these tariffs. And the question that comes up is now, is this going to only hurt maybe the big businesses? What about our small business people? What about the people that we buy goods and services from?
George, on what platform? There's no way you got the top of the wick.
Yes, I mean, I don't think it's. I think it will certainly. If you're a smaller company that maybe imports a single product,
bro, that's robbery.
That's a common business model these days. Then you may if
YouTube chat, is this a robbery? Is this theft? Look at this. Is this theft? This is theft. Did it hit? Bro. It was off by 0.1. It was off by 0.2. 0.2. Look at this. Yo, you guys are witnessing assault and you guys are witnessing grand larceny right now. You guys are accessories to this crime. You're just gonna sit there and just let this happen?
Left of my time at the Fed is have the
Malik is
economy
in.
be strong and
Shout out your entries in the Zoom chat.
have inflation be under control, have a solid labor market. I want to turn it over to my successor in that condition. Of course,
Chat is 0.2 points off of the sell. Is that kind of accurate? Is that kind of crazy?
think about it.
Decimal.
So how are you protected? By law, by constitution? Where does your authority come from?
I think I've covered all that. I do think we're fully protected, and
Maxie Waters been in office for 40 years, still hasn't fucking figured out how the Fed works.
let's just do our jobs. And that's what we do. We don't talk about those issues at all. And all we do is do our jobs as best we can. And, it's not an easy job, but it's one we've willingly taken on, and very important that we remain focused just on the job and not on other things.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, our vice chair for communications, Mr. Lawler. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Powell, as recently as yesterday.
Did the market hit you guys as TP1 on your platform? Starting to think. Because we did have this candle go straight from, it came very close to entry and then came all the way down to that TP1 already smashed. So did you guys, did the TP1 hit on your platform or no?
We may be able to cut rates in July.
So I would say this.
All right, well, let's see, because we might get a break through the zone. I told you guys we were going to get a quick rejection. I just really hope that wasn't it. But I'm confident we get one more push down. So I'm going to be patient here.
A particular meeting, I don't think we need to be in any rush because the economy is still strong. The labor market is strong. If we were to see the labor market, meaningfully weaken in a way that was concerning, that would matter for that decision. But if we see inflation, continuing not to move up, we hadn't expected inflation to move up much. We do expect it to move in the summer. And if we see it not happening, we'll learn from that.
The September 2018 Teal book suggested that the Fed, seeing through tariffs, inflationary effects, is an appropriate response so long as inflation expectations are firmly anchored and that the pass-through costs are relatively short-lived. Would you agree that this assessment from the Teal book still applies to today?
I would. Those are the exact factors that we.
All right, I'm going to enter the first trade manually here on Trade-Evate as soon as we hit the 60 mark. We're very, very close. I just want to get a better entry than that wick, right? So anything above 60 or 61, that would be a prime entry. So as soon as we break into the 60s, I'm going to enter my first position, and then my sell limits are still open.
The magnitude of these changes remains modest. So if these conditions hold, is it not unreasonable to think that underlying inflation trends?
You guys know how you can pick a voice on Siri? This guy picked douchebag.
That's certainly a very defensible position. I think what others on the committee think, and what I think is that this is a question we need to be careful with because it's different than it was in 2018. The difference is that we haven't had 2% inflation. In 2018, we hadn't had inflation as high as 2% for a decade. This is a different situation. We haven't fully restored price stability. And another shock, we have to be careful. If there's a meaningfully large and sustained inflation shock, we have to be careful about that. And so, I think we're just trying to be careful and cautious. And we really think that's the best thing we can do for the people that we serve. If that happens, we need to be there for it. And so, we're in a difficult situation in deciding exactly when to move. But again, if we continue to see inflation come in, and not prove up at the higher levels than we expect, then that would matter for our decision making.
Chairman Powell, economist John Taylor once noted that the Federal Reserve should deviate from its own Taylor rule in the event of an oil shock, similar to the tariff scenario. A one-time price increase from an oil shock should not be accompanied with an increase in interest rates. Do you agree with that assessment?
I generally do, yes.
Previously, you said that if you wait for inflation to get back down to 2% to cut rates, you are already too late. You also said in November 2024 that inflation was on a sustainable path to 2%. Given
The Fed is always too late. That's their job. Overcorrect.
moderately restrictive, and that an oil or tariff shock may not impact underlying inflation in a significant or meaningful way, because as the monetary policy report established, inflation expectations are firmly anchored. What is the reason not to cut rates?
Well, it's uncertainty about the size and potential persistence of the potential, but highly uncertain inflation from tariffs. By the way,
Cooked. So on the one hand, they're saying that they have anchored inflation expectations, so they know. On the second hand, they don't know because we have to see what the tariffs look like.
just for the record,
Well, back in the beginning of the Biden administration,
He's cooking them.
okay, when we talk about inflation, they increased federal spending by $2.5 trillion each year. $5 trillion in new spending. That's what gave us inflation, by printing all of this new money and borrowing. And yet you did not respond to that by raising rates. In fact, you were late to raise rates.
Let's go.
Now, again, we see a situation where we're late to cut rates.
Who is this guy?
That is the challenge here.
Gentleman yields back. Chair,
Congressman Lawler. Congressman Lawler. Cooking. Bro.
November 2020. Chairman Powell, economist John Taylor once noted that the Federal Reserve should deviate from its own Taylor rule in the event of an oil shock, similar to the tariff scenario. A one-time price increase from an oil shock should not be accompanied with an increase in interest rates. Do you agree with that assessment?
I generally do, yes.
Previously, you said that if you wait for inflation to get back down to 2% to cut rates, you are already too late. You also said in November 20.
Just bullet-sized holes in Jerome Powell's logic. Like Maxine Waters is brain dead, so you can feed her this bullshit. That's why I was kind of surprised by Rashida Tlaib, because it's like if you just heard what he said and then you read it back to him, he starts stumbling on his words because he realizes how stupid what he just said was.
2024, that inflation was on a sustainable path to 2%. Given that the FOMC believes that interest rates now are moderately restrictive and that an oil or tariff shock may not impact underlying inflation in a significant or meaningful way, because as the monetary policy report established.
We need this rejection, chat. We need this rejection, because if we break above and then hope for that retest rejection, we're cooked. This thing looks like it can continue pretty aggressively. So we really need this next 15-minute candle here. Do us some justice.
Highly uncertain inflation from tariffs. By the way, we have 5 Taylor rules in the monetary policy report. 4 of them say that the policy rate is in the right range, and the other one calls for a hike.
Right.
Just for the record.
Well, back in the beginning of the Biden administration, okay, when we talk about inflation, they increased federal spending by $2.5 trillion each year. $5 trillion in new spending. That's what gave us inflation, by printing all of this new money and borrowing. And yet you did not respond to that by raising rates. In fact, you were late to raise rates. And now, again, we see a situation where we're late to cut rates. That is the challenge here.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman Powell, to the best of your knowledge, has President Trump put forward a coherent tariff?
Yeah, you would know all about coherence. Okay. Let me stop judging people by the cover.
Discuss.
Well, what do you think?
Sir, it would be
you're
I
running
don't comment on the
economy.
president's words or the president's.
Does the president, in your opinion, does he have a coherent tariff policy? You ought to have an opinion on.
All right. Yeah, nah, ain't nobody doing that. Let me see.
Why are you against it? Because it's not going to help our debt.
No, that's the first big lie that's told about the big, beautiful bill. You can finagle the numbers. The big, beautiful bill looks at a 10-year spending window. Okay. And what it does is in the next 5 years, it's going to add to the deficit. Like nobody disputes that. Even the number crunchers that work for the president know that's going to happen. What they're claiming is 5 years from now, it will start to break even and reduce the deficit. The problem is the people I serve with, a lot of them aren't going to be there 5 years from now.
Right.
The President Trump's not going to be there 5 years from now. This big, beautiful bill doesn't force people 5 years from now to do that. It suggests that they should do that, and it will do that unless somebody does something different. But they're going to do something different 5 years from now. We'll get to that point, and they'll say, oh my gosh, that Congress 5 years ago set up a fiscal cliff. We're going to be hit with tax increases on seniors. We're going to be hit with tax on tips. We're going to be hit with tax.
Are we in profits or what? Are we in profits?
Terry's not going to get as much money as it got last year. We got to do something about this. And so what they'll do is they'll cut taxes again and they'll increase spending again. And this deficit will never go down. And I'm not even talking about the debt. The deficit is how much you add to the debt every year. It's about $2 trillion. It's going to be above $2 trillion next year. And for as far as the eye can see.
But I got to talk with JD Vance a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about, but that a lot of what's happening now is still because of the last party that was in.
Yeah, and a lot of it's still because of what Trump did when he was in last time. So
I just wondered how far it's tough to like as a regular person, it's tough to correlate how far up or downstream you are from.
Well, Mr. Theo Vaughn, let me help you out. The 2001 dot-com bubble started this charade. All right, so we've been running our government on this made-up concept of debt since we won World War II. America has the power of the printing press as the world's reserve currency. We get to abuse the printing press and kind of get away with some stuff more than everybody else. So we get to issue ourselves debt and then print the money and then give ourselves the money and then hope that we can pay it back. So 2001, the dot-com bubble, the government bailed out a bunch of companies so that we don't go into a recession. 2008 exposed all the cockroaches and the rust under the hood of this car. All the fraud that was happening in the financial sector, all the instability was all exposed. And the government did three really big measures. Number one was regulatory with Basel and kind of Dodd-Frank and some of the other really big legislations that then put restraints on banks. The second one was TARP. It's an Obama program to basically give, what is it, like stimulus checks. Because the Fed can't give out money to individuals, only to banks. Only the government, the Treasury, can give out money to individuals. So they both work together with this new program called quantitative easing, where the government's going to print these pieces of paper, bonds, and the Fed's going to buy them with this new printed money. So they both just print random stuff, trade with each other, and then boom, real money. Okay, that started quantitative easing 1, 2, and 3. Those three facilities lasted from 2009 to 2013. Okay, then 14 years of just zero interest rates. People, corporations are borrowing for $0 of interest, putting it in fucking anything, and then paying back the bank the minimum. 2020 hit, COVID, we had to drop the rates back to zero. We had to start printing a lot of money. Quantitative easing 4 was bigger than the first 3 quantitative easing facilities, the money printing operations. The one that happened in 2020 was bigger than the first 3 combined. And so we printed something like $12 to $13 trillion into the economy. And that's why we got inflation. So it started really with World War II, and then you kind of jump forward. The dot-com bubble kind of started this abusing the system. And then the 2008 was the point of no return. And now every Congress is going to kick the can down the road. And that's what Massey is saying, is that Trump can say all these things about the bill and all these things. But in 5 years from now, the congressmen who are in power are going to change all of this right back to where it was. Or just keep it the same and keep spending this money. All right, I think I may have got kicked out here, or I may have got entered into my cells. All right, all my cell limits hit. So now it's real. Okay, now it gets real.
Whatever, who was actually responsible for whatever's occurring. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. But, in 2020, we had COVID hit, and they put a $2 trillion spending bill on the floor. And I was the only one who would oppose it. I said, this is going to cause, Trump was president and Pelosi was speaker, but they were working together. I said, this is going to cause massive inflation. You're going to have shortages in the stores, and this is going to last for years. And the inflation, once it happens, the prices will never go back down. And that's exactly what happened. They said, Congressman Massey, the president.
Sorry, last interruption, but this is the same logic that Powell was saying, that high interest rates won't cause high housing prices. But it's not like these housing prices are going to go from 560K down to like 350 back to where they were. We're still going to have high housing prices, but now nobody can afford them because of the interest and because of the price of the house. They've really fucked this up.
In 2020, we had COVID hit, and they put a $2 trillion spending bill on the floor. And I was the only one who would oppose it. I said, this is going to cause,
y'all see why I like this guy?
Pelosi was speaker, but they were working together. I said, this is going to cause massive inflation. You're going to have shortages in the stores, and this is going to last for years. And the inflation, once it happens, the prices will never go back down. And that's exactly what happened. They said, Congressman Massey, the president's chief of staff at the time, told me, he said, it was Mark Meadows, who's a friend of mine. We both worked together in Congress. He said, the reason this is $2 trillion is so we don't have to pass another one of these. It's just going to be painful once. Well, guess what? By the time December rolled around under Trump, we passed another one of these stimulus packages that was over $1 trillion. And don't forget, people got a $1,200 check the first time, and they got a $600 check the second time. I told folks that's the cheese in the trap. That that $1,200 check, you multiply that times the number of families in the United States, it wasn't 5% of the spending in that bill.
It kind of looks like buyers are going to smash through. So on the first rejection back down, I'm going to de-risk this trade, look to get out. And then maybe I'll leave one contract and break even. But I'll be honest, with how aggressive this candle is looking, if we don't get a rejection in this next 15 minutes, actually, if we don't get a rejection here in the next probably 10 minutes, we're very likely just breaking through all these levels. So we got to see a rejection here pretty soon. And that's what I'll stick around for. Yeah.
Believe it's like interviews that are just to get the hype, and then they off stage, they're all in the, in the locker room, like, rubbing GHB on each other's backs and stuff like that and gramming out.
Let me tell you something.
For the next 10 years, what happens?
She looks like
So many things will happen. You can see a big increase
Of hands being removed from those three main tops.
Yeah, why she got the Ulysses S. Grant season 3 on, bro?
where nobody put us in charge. We're done, Congressional Budget Office and other agencies can make assessments like that. We do have a role to maximize employment, but we take immigration policy we take it as it comes. What it's obviously done is it's really reduced the amount of growth in the labor force. And so at the same time, demand for workers has been coming down as well, because they've been coming down at about the same.
One drop at a time, reduce.
All right, the next rejection back down, I'm going to close this trade. Actually, no, wait. On trade evade, we're still around the previous highs, but man, that means another 30-minute wait. So this is where the alerts and where the timer is coming. All right, let's actually get back to. She looks like she was cooking for a second. Why she got that? That Jefferson Davis summer collection on. Why she got that? Not Ulysses Grant, bro. Robert E. Lee, season 4. She got that. All right, that's all I got. If you guys have more World War II references, let me know. She's dressed like a Confederate soldier. She's got the Confederate soldier jacket on. That's the joke. That's the punchline.
But we do know that unfortunately what's happening right now after 6 months of being Mr. President being in office, that we're losing thousands and thousands of workers, what the ICE leadership has called collateral damage. And most of those people are working in 3 main sectors: construction, hospitality, and agriculture. Even the president said the other day in a tweet that he understands that those hands are needed. We're talking about 15% of the economy: construction, hospitality, and agricultural. So my question to you is, what is the growth effect on the economy if this type of removal of hands being removed from those three main top sectors.
So
Hey, General Sumter has a point.
immigration is another area where nobody put us in charge. We're not, Congressional Budget Office and other agencies can make assessments like that. We do have a role to maximize employment, but we take immigration policy.
I'm really looking to close as soon as possible. I think I missed that first rejection down, the one that hit TP1 real quick. I told you guys it was going to be a quick wick. I did not anticipate, drawing my fib wrong. I think we might see like a 10-point rejection here. This is where I'll look to close. Kind of comes back to entry. We can get out and break even. Otherwise, I do see a potential continuation here.
What's affecting the growth?
Well, there are two things that affect growth. One is growth in the labor force, more people working. And the other thing is productivity. How much do they produce per hour worked? And when you significantly slow the growth of the labor force, you will slow the growth of the economy. But I think, again, it's not for us to have a view on immigration policy.
No, I understand. I was just my comment, but you do agree that if we don't have those hands, then we don't grow.
I think that growth will slow and actually is slowing this year. And that's one of the reasons.
Well, we don't like that. So now let's talk about of the next 10 years, 2025 to 2035. Americans are not having enough kids.
I'm never going to judge books by their cover again, people. Because everybody I've cooked has asked the best questions.
Current trends that I just explained to you and that you just reiterated, will there be enough workers to fulfill the labor needs of our economy between 2025 and 2035?
So I think labor economists do observe the phenomenon you're talking about, which is demand for labor going to be met by the domestic population, the native-born population? And the answer appears to be probably not over the next 10 years.
And then what about if we do not have that labor force over the next 10 years? What happens?
So many things will happen. You can see a big increase in productivity, which would mean we don't need as many.
I closed two of the contracts, got two open, and I'm just going to hold these two. All right, stop loss or TP.
You would not count on that?
I wouldn't count on it.
You would not?
No, I mean, I think
Why
there'll be
not?
gains because with productivity enhancing things, they typically take longer to be implemented. And then it takes a while for the gains to be shown. I think in the case of artificial intelligence, those gains are coming, but they may take longer or be less in the beginning than expected.
And during the time that those changes happen, then what happens? Our economy doesn't grow. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, but I mean, those who make immigration policy are entitled to weigh these factors. We
No, I hear you.
report on what happens, but it's really not our job.
I understand it's not. I just want to hear what you're thinking, what's your expertise based on those immigration laws that we're implementing right now. The last one, because I only have 30 seconds. Do you think that with everything that we have talked about, do you think that we can continue remaining, or the United States economy can continue being the #1 economy in the world, and that we could compete if we were to have the immigration laws that we have right now?
I think you could have, the highest per capita earnings, but if you're talking about the aggregate output, then, population growth may be a constraint.
And which one of the two is more important?
Gentleman's time has expired.
Good question.
Well, you can, I think
Gentlewoman's time has expired.
All right.
Let me turn
Thank
to
you,
the
Chairman.
ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, Mr. Himes, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome Chairman Powell. Let me start by thanking you for your careful keeping in your lane and steering clear of fiscal policy, and in particular for your stalwart defense of independent monetary policy. You're getting pressure from very powerful places and lots of kibitzing from lots of members on the interest rate question, and most know better that our independent monetary policy is the very bedrock of our economy. So thank you for that. Mr. Chairman, I want to talk just a little bit about some of the technical matters associated with energy prices and inflation, because obviously turmoil in the Middle East has sent oil prices swinging wildly, with West Texas Intermediate in the last month or so being anywhere between $61 and $75 a barrel. We recently saw the Iranian parliament vote to close the Strait of Hormuz, which currently handles around 20 million barrels a day, a fifth of global demand and a little bit more in terms of natural gas. Chair Powell, you said last week that conflict in the Middle East in the 1970s resulted in very large inflation shocks. In contrast to the 1970s, today the United States does not import most of its energy. We call ourselves energy self-sufficient on a net basis. But I hear the argument made that I think is wrong, that because we're energy self-sufficient, somehow we are insulated from global energy market prices. Can you comment on that? Is there any validity to the notion that we are not, American consumers of energy are not subject to global swings in energy prices?
Yeah, so the price of oil is set globally, right? And I think if you go back a few years, the thought was that when the global, we had a natural shock absorber, which is that we would just drill more. And that we would, if prices went up, we would drill more. And so you wouldn't have these sustained price shocks that we had during the 1970s and the original OPEC era. I think that is actually in question now because, the oil industry in the US is being much more careful and focused on return on investment than they were, having been burned with overcapacity.
And I mean, yeah, in the law.
Yeah, it looks like buyers are going to win this one. We might get a rejection back through the zone, so it's worth just holding to SL, but de-risking is the priority right now.
Middle East, if it resulted in $120 barrel oil, which is where oil was in 2022, that would have a fairly substantial inflationary impact on the American household. Is that correct?
We would certainly feel that, and as we discussed earlier, there's a lot of lore around looking through oil price shocks, but that depends on the facts and circumstances.
What, as a technical matter, we tend to refer to CPI, which is a basket of goods, and we measure the price changes. Roughly speaking, what percentage of that basket is comprised of energy?
I don't have that on the top of my head. It's much less than it was, of course. And oil consumption is much less than it was in the 70s as a percent of GDP.
But energy includes natural gas and gasoline, and that's it's a meaningful portion of the.
Yeah, so of course we have more natural gas than we have so much natural gas, so that'll always be there for us.
So none of us can predict what's going to happen in the Middle East in an hour, much less in a week or a month or a year. But as a technical matter, at what price for a barrel of oil does the American household begin to feel inflationary effects? So we're at $75 a barrel roughly right now. At what price point does the American household begin to feel some inflationary effects?
I don't want to throw out a number. I think we're frankly, it's too early to say that something like that's going to happen. And I know you know that, but I wouldn't want to throw out a specific number. If prices went up materially, people would feel that.
Okay. Again, I think if I look at the data here, WTI per barrel, about 120, it peaked at about $120 in 2022. What do your models suggest would occur to inflation, and how would it influence the Fed's thinking should we be back at $120 a barrel?
Well, let's just say there's a big price spike in that range. So, we would look at that and we would ask ourselves, look at the overall situation. We would ask ourselves, should we react to that? So, for example, during what we called the Arab Spring back in the early teens.
All right, fuck this history lesson. The answer is $85 a barrel. That's when prices go to $3.50 a gallon on average. And that's when you're going to start to see some discomfort. Man, put me in there. Actually, don't put me in there. After this trade, maybe not. But the answer is $85 a barrel.
I thank the gentleman from Connecticut. Chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina. Mr. Moore, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
I wouldn't say it's a nice hold, though. I would say that this thing is going to smash through. Just how aggressive this previous candle was on the 30-minute, it engulfed this entire area of consolidation. This was kind of what the candle that we were looking for. We got that first rejection. I think I had my fibs drawn wrong. Once it hit TP1, it established support, and the bullish momentum is in full effect. So I think that buyers have control. I think that they're likely to create new highs before making a retest. I'm going to hold because I already de-risked. So like whatever I was expecting to risk, I just cut it in half. And so and I moved my stop loss down kind of just above the previous high here. If we're not going to reject the previous high, then this thing is going to go hit all the extension levels on the fibs and then come back, or maybe not even come back, just establish a big bullish run just like this, kind of basically like a copy and paste of this, and then just end up somewhere up here and then consolidate for the rest of the session.
These changes, such as ending
But we pray.
examination practices that informally encourage banks to close certain accounts without written justification.
So we're developing, I should say, Vice Chair Bowman is developing a range of policies that will.
Another plug for Vice Chair Bowman, the next Fed president.
We've eliminated reputation risk largely in a thoughtful way from those things. I think we became more aware of that problem over the course of last year, and like the other agencies, decided to move away from that. We're very conscious of the fact that we shouldn't be telling banks who they can lend to, that's a decision for them in the private sector.
Let me ask you this, how are you ensuring though that like the frontline examiners are aligned with this new direction and not continuing with any past practices?
You know, I will say that is the ultimate question is will and I think they will. And I think as a former bank examiner, Vice Chair Bowman is actually very well positioned to engage with supervisors and in a way that someone with experience can do successfully. Whereas if you don't have that experience, I think it might be harder.
Thank you. You know, Secretary Bessent recently announced a drive to change the culture of supervision through improvements to examination procedures, enhanced monitoring of examiners' compliance with those procedures, and more realistic processes for appealing supervisory findings. That includes defining unsafe and unsound by rule using more objective measures rooted in financial risk. Do you support this initiative, and will we be seeing further rule changes at the Federal Reserve to achieve this goal?
So I like the sound of all that. I will say on issues of supervision, Vice Chair Bowman has, significant authority, and also she's got the background and the understanding. And first thing I would do is I would ask her what she thinks about that.
Just sort of a changing direction on a couple of questions. During the volatility in the Treasury markets last April, some have speculated that foreign investors were dumping Treasury securities. Since then, the recent data has showed that foreign investors holding of U.S. Treasuries held close to a record high in April. Does this data show that Treasury's safe haven status and the dollar's global reserve currency status remained strong while the administration conducted trade negotiations?
I would say yes to that. I think we need to be careful about these narratives that pop up quickly. I mean, we're the world's reserve currency and the world's greatest democracy. And I think the dollar end is always going to be, for a long time, it's going to be the reserve currency and the place where people want to be.
Let me ask you this. Do you believe there's a possibility that Treasury markets will crack, just as Jamie Dimon has recently warned at the Reagan National Economic Forum?
I don't want to say things like that. I don't think that's something that's happening. Treasury markets are functioning well and normally, and they did function through a period of pretty substantial stress. And as you pointed out, Mr. Moore, that they're focusing well now.
Thank you. With that, I yield back. And actually, if Ms. Salazar is still here, I'll give her my remaining time. Not I yield back.
The reason the double top is not valid is because the body of this 30-minute candle, try to make it clear, the body of this bullish engulfing candle closed above this body on the 30-minute. And so it started to engulf these wicks. If it had closed below, then you could argue for a lower high. But in order for this to go, to go bearish, you need to create lower high. So as of right now, we've created higher floors and a higher ceiling. By definition, that's bullish. And so the only thing that we can hope for is like a retest before this thing pops. That way we can get out unscathed. And that's the only thing worth holding for. So it's important to see the signs and accept the reality. Brick wall coming. Okay, so you have to minimize the impact as much as possible, de-risk, but then also, if it hasn't fully broken above, let the market tell you what it's going to do. instead of just assuming. So two sides to that coin. Look at the candles, read the signs, but also until it breaks, it could come back down.
For me to get my manicure monthly because
Okay, what the Tucker Carlson standing up for Thomas Massey, because I'll be damned if I listen to her talking about her manicure prices. They're not coming back down, ladies. Neither are men's haircuts. So we're paying fucking $40 a haircut, boys. Cooked. I think it was right here.
You can totally disagree with Thomas Massey. You know, you think his ideas are dumb or whatever. It's fine, of course. But to impugn his character is so disgusting to me.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And, you know, I have
that makes me, because I know Thomas Massey. Yeah. Like, I don't agree with everything Thomas Massey says. I don't agree with everything anyone says. But that's disgusting that people would say that about him.
And when people attack, I invite him on my show. You know, come on, because I can't stand when people attack him or call him that he's somehow not make America great again because he stands in the way of a massive multi-trillion-dollar debt time bomb that that we're going to pass in Congress, that he talks about that, or that says we shouldn't bomb other countries.
Well, his views are sincere. I mean, you could say, well, you know, there are a million different plausible arguments you can make for and against any potential action, you know. But you can't say that Thomas Massey is thoughtless. You can't say that he's acting on behalf of somebody else. He's totally transparent about what he believes and why. And he's totally sincere. And he's saying what he believes is true. And in a decent society, in a Christian society, that has to matter. Just because you're sincere doesn't mean you're right, of course.
Right.
But we have to take that.
All right, I'm making a judgment. I'm out. If this thing ends up dumping, then so be it. Yeah, I mean, there was about 20-ish, 25 more points until stop loss. And so I'd rather just save those, put it in the bank. If this thing ends up dropping, yes, I'll be heartbroken. But I'm making a decision based on risk management. So you got the gambler, and then you have the trader. The gambler's like, oh, but what if this thing crashes and I could have been rich? Right? And so they're kind of thinking more of a optimistic, but more delusional, kind of greedy mindset, which is important for trading. Don't get me wrong. These people tend to make a lot of money, which is the what if, right? The risk management, though, is about protecting capital. And so this is, what if it goes the wrong way? And how would I feel if this thing goes completely to SL and I lose all that money then? And so risk management is like, okay, well, I'll minimize my loss now. And this is how you think about it. It's kind of like, think about it backwards, reverse engineer it. Think about yourself once the market closes. You close the computer, it's done. Which decision would you be more glad that you made? Walking away or staying? Taking the next trade or stopping? Closing the trade early or, you know, letting it go to stop loss? And then when you think about it that way, you can basically engineer the outcomes of your life. I don't want to be pissed off later. And so it's like, if I held this trade out of some hope or whatever that it might turn around, then I'll feel pretty stupid later if it doesn't go my way. And I'd rather avoid that. I'd rather look back and say, okay, if this trade does dump and I would have been right, it's okay because I accepted the ramifications of my decision when I made it. Okay? That's all it takes. Some days you're the pigeon, some days you're the statue, people. Drop a like and subscribe on the stream. I'm not going back to Jay Powell's circus show. Complete waste of time. And yeah, I guess world peace is a bigger driver of market volume than a staged hearing in front of the House Budget Committee or Financial Service Committee, whatever. They're all the same. All right. Happy and safe trading, everybody. Drop a like and subscribe on the stream. Make sure to tell a friend. And if you guys want to sign up for the NASDAQ Master Class starting June 29th, make sure to click the link in the description. Catch you guys on the next stream. Peace. All right, members. Fuck. Some days it's like that.